to speak about nihilism and Dostoevsky in the contemporary world.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miglena. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear young researchers, thank you very much for your attention to my work. And thank you for inviting me to this series of lecture that I'm very pleased and proud and happy to deliver to the students and researchers of the University of Arizona. I would like to give special thanks to Professor Katerina Kolosova, who took the initiative of this invitation, as far as I know, and to all of those people that made our encounter this evening and our dialogue possible. And also give sincere thanks to my friend, Professor Miglena Nikolchina, who knows my work intimately and who has just devoted 2 seminars within the framework of this course in order to clarify and discuss some key conceptions and concepts and notions of my research, presenting my trajectory as a theorist, psychoanalyst, novelist, and woman. Today and next week, I'll talk about my rediscovery of the great Russian novelist Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, born in 1821, that died in 1881, before tackling 2 other themes next year, themes that I continue to question. The first, I think it will be in spring semester, the need to believe and the desire to know. And later, another theme that is very dear to my thinking and to my heart, of course, that I called Foreign Ethics of the Feminine. So you have already noticed that my English is far from being perfect. So I'll therefore ask you to allow me to read the text of my lecture about what is nihilism in Dostoevsky, which will be projected on the screen, thanks to the help of Professor Nikolchina again, whom I thank again for this contribution. Over the years, punctuated by my psychoanalytical practice, I have acquired what I'll call a transgenre style of writing. Neither essay nor novel, both at the same time, a kind of dramatic oratorio, free association, a literary work, sometimes a social phenomena, can reveal to me, I call this an inner experience in which I invest myself. I understand this inner experience, expérience intérieure, in the sense of Georges Bataille, the French writer, who defined it as, I'm quoting, an approval of life into death. In my Dostoevsky face à la mort, ou Le sexe hanté du langage, which is my late book on Dostoevsky, on the way of translation by Columbia University Press. The French title is Dostoevsky face à la mort, and in English it will be something like Dostoevsky facing death, or the haunted sex of language. In this last book on Dostoevsky, I propose, I hope that you'll find it like I consider it, a surprising, I dare to say, total and new Dostoevsky, galvanized by language. I accompany to the scaffold the writer was sentenced to death for his revolutionary French ideas. I follow him in the Siberian prison, where he begins his metamorphosis that will lead him to the great novels, The Demons, Brother Karamazov, The Idiot, and so on. A new narrator, clandestine and demonic, is emerging in the jail in precisely the Notes from the House of Death. He published it in 1862. And also in another book a little bit later, that is called Notes from the Underground, 1864. The disciple of conflicts, as Dostoevsky defined himself, anticipated the prison-like nature of the totalitarian universe that would be revealed later in the Holocaust and in the Gulag, and that threatens us today through the power of technology. In that oratorio, which is this last book I just mentioned to you, I remember that I found in my native Bulgaria a Russian virus. This expression belongs to the poet Joseph Brodsky, who escaped from this virus in the air, he says, by putting it into the microscope of his poetry. I took for my part the microscope of transference, according to Freud. I recall also in my oratorio, which is my last book, my astonishment as a schoolgirl at the funeral bust of Stalin, the father of people, and at the Soviet dissidents who have something of Dostoevsky, as it seems to me. Let me share with you this personal involvement in Dostoevsky's text. When I arrived in France in Christmas Eve, 1965, I discovered that Paris knew the Russian formalist who had inspired French structuralism from Claude Lévi-Strauss to Roland Barthes. Innovative thoughts were inspired by them. Émile Benveniste insisted on the enunciation in the statement, and the enunciation in the grammar and in phonology. So in the psychological aspect or psychoanalytic aspect of speech. Lacan introduced the signifier in the unconscious. The second edition of Mikhail Bakhtin's book, called Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, had just been published in Russian, and we're eager in Bulgaria to read it. Bakhtin pierces in this book the structures of language by searching for its deep logic in dialogue, not a structure, but the dialogue before and within the structure. I only speak in twos. I don't speak by myself. I speak for the other and with the other, he says in substance, positing from the start a constitutive alterity in the proximity, the alterity and proximity together. Bakhtin's Dostoevsky revealed to me a different vision and practice of language as intrinsically dialogical, and of writing as necessarily intertextual, as I said it in some theoretical works that I wrote afterwards. I had to bolster this with Husserl's phenomenology and Freud's and Melanie Klein's clinical thought in order to make it more precise and develop its deep logic. The signifier, the semiotic core, and the symbolic. I suppose Professor Nikolchina had already introduced it in this problematic of mine that is influenced, if not founded, by my reading of Dostoevsky through Bakhtin, and that I developed in my book, Revolution of Poetic Language from 1974. Afterwards, the interpretation of the works of Céline, Proust, Artaud, Colette, Solers, Duras, etc., were to follow. And they provided the tenuous, prudent, and indecent pleasure, according to the words again, the Georges Bataille, pleasures in search of a strangeness which expanded the self, the otherness that is in ourselves, foreign to ourselves, I said in one other book that maybe some of you know. Should I turn then, when I touch to this otherness in ourselves, should I turn to the metaphysics, to spirituality, to different religion experience, which had programmed the tools of the human sciences? Or should I look for something which, not being got, disappeared in the night of pure writers, in the ardor of rebellious moralists? Neither one, spirituality, neither other, the fetishism of writing. Psychoanalysis was to open new stimulating horizon to me. And this is from this horizon of psychoanalysis that I try to reread Dostoevsky again, and that we'll find in my last two books on Dostoevsky. Psychoanalysis, and when I use this word, of course, you speak of Lacan, and you know one of the most famous psychoanalysts today. Lacan captured psychosexuality in brilliant shortcuts, which sliced into the flesh of words, but which also distanced me from him, as, for example, in the case when he gravitated around what he saw purely topological origin of language, without speaking precisely and directly about drives, organism, sexuality as organic experience, but as a purely topological origin of language. The laborious patience of Freud suited me better than those shortcuts of Lacan, were very exciting, stimulating too. The laborious patience of Freud suited me better, even in his reading of Dostoevsky, which he waged in the grid of Oedipal desire, noting, however, the pre-psychic oddities, the mechanism of abnormal organic discharge in this strange Russian genius. Incredulous readers don't fail to apostrophize me. Love Dostoevsky, the author of my life. They ask me this because my, not last, but before my last book about Dostoevsky, I made a book, I wrote a book in the collection called Authors of My Life. It is sort of selection of extras of choice text of Dostoevsky with a preface, and the preface in question is now translated by Columbia University Press, but with the title The Flood of Dostoevsky and the Flood of Language. So people finding my book on Dostoevsky in the collection Author of My Life ask me if he is an author of your life, maybe you love Dostoevsky. Is it possible to love Dostoevsky? And my answer is that both expressions, love and author of myself, are too narrow to convey the engulfment and the regeneration triggered to me, and I hope triggered in you when you read Dostoevsky, by the vocal range of this swirling sense that both bothers and uplifts us in reading this Russian writer. A free-flowing writing is confronting its translators from the beginning of the translation of Dostoevsky in French or in English or in other languages. And the translators were confronted with the pitfalls of this free-flowing, which they are not unaware and which they exhaust themselves to rationalize. Not as confusing was the hyperbolic title of the series, Authors of My Life. Is my life entirely directed and shaped by him? Because also in the series I'm referring, there are other books comprising the overwhelming names of the contributors of this collection that I discovered afterwards. For instance, there is a book about Descartes by Paul Valéry, Schopenhauer by Thomas Mann, Max by Trotsky, and Dostoevsky by Julia Kristeva. Many times I wanted to protect myself from this poignant tradition, to give up, until I read Andrei Markovitch's translation of Dostoevsky in French, which restored to the French language his genius of letting the speech unfold without fear of the sacred. The dazzling gallery of characters, Dostoevskian characters, redoubled and multiplied, the archipelago of female solitudes that assumed transgression, even pedophilia, submerged the finitude of our confined passions. And this context of being struck and uplifted by this strange, very hyperbolic and swirling vocal range of writing, the theme of nihilism struck me because it's a theme that obsesses the writer. Nihilism, I'll give you a definition of how Dostoevsky understands nihilism, which is, of course, a very short and condensed definition and not exhausting, but interesting and opening our interest into this term. He says the following: nihilism appeared among us because we are all nihilists. Where did the nihilists come from? They did not come from anywhere. They have always been within us, in us, near us. He wrote this in the notebooks from 1881 towards the end of his life. Let us stop and think about this sentence. What does it mean when he says that nihilism is in us? What means us? We? Who is we? We, the Russians, because he's Russian and he's very proud of being Russian. I'll speak a little bit about this lecture in the following. We, the Russians, torn between Europe and Asia, that attracts and repel each other. Each Europe and Asia fascinated and baffled by the habits and the customs of the other. Is it we, the Orthodox? The Orthodox as an Orthodox religion, not Catholic, not Protestant, but Orthodox, devoted to the pathos of the elements. This is the definition that Solzhenitsyn gives to orthodoxy. Pathos stichi, the pathos of elements, cruel underground of passions, and plaintive adoration of icons. A veritable village nihilist, says Dostoevsky in a novel called Vlas. Necessary sublime as an experience, because very primitive, original, regressive, but at the same time may be preferable to the sloggy doctrinaire subscribed to the scholastic pleasure of the understanding that we are more of us Westerners. If we think about the characters in Dostoevsky, Raskolnikov, Stavrogin, Kirillov, Verkhovensky, Ivan Karamazov, the great heroes of Dostoevsky are nihilists, atheists, deniers of God, but also don't protest against him too much in a sort of religious involvement in their conviction. The conviction becomes a sort of religion. You worship the Holy Spirit without knowing it, diagnoses Tikhon while listening to Stavrogin's confession in the novel The Demon. Kirillov commits suicide to be free and alone, but shouting with a religious passion, freedom, equality, fraternity, or death. Orthodox Russia might not have been the cradle of nihilism if We Are All Nihilists did not concern us all. So I mean here that nihilism is not only this development, spreading out, bursting of passion without thinking, just feeling emotion, love and hate, eros and thanatos, as Freud said, but also because without being orthodox, the speaking humanity, according to Freud, is split between the passion and the knowledge, the drive and the meaning. Our humanity today globalized and more than ever in war, which participate in this sense in nothingness and nihilism. Since when? Since unbridled liberalism, colonialism, the rise of technology, since the history of metaphysics, which contains nihilism in its essence, as Heidegger sustains, meaning that the development of techniques that puts nihilism open because the technique cannot think the passion that is beneath the meaning. According to Freud, the reason of the existing of nihilism in us is not technology only, but the fact that we are speaking being, that the speech is developed over, up, on the bottom of passion, drives, love and hate. So from the beginning, as well as we speak, we're split between meaning and negation of passion that is bursting beneath and threatening meaning. Today, Dostoevsky's writing challenges in depth the social and political history of Europe, but also of speaking beings in the world. Dostoevsky's novels are novels of thought. His theme, his topic is thinking with, against, and in companion with drives and jouissance or destruction. The polyphony of the text is the only way, says the writer in substance, to penetrate with reverence the underground of nihilism and to transmit this enigmatic Dostoevskian jouissance, the word наслаждение means in Russian jouissance, the jouissance of writing that leaves the nihilism behind us. We have to try to write, to sublimate nihilism, this bursting of meaning, this destruction that is in us, and not to deny the passion, but to give it different creative expressions. I'll not discuss today the two philosophical approaches that have articulated the radically new reality of nihilism in the 20th century. The approach of Ernst Junger in 3 books, The Worker, On Pain, and Concerning the Line, who links nihilism to the massification put in place during the First World War and in the world order subjugated to technology. And the other approach, which is the approach of Heidegger in the Introduction to Metaphysics and Question 1, who invites us to think an inclusion of being into nothingness and to consider man as the seat holder for nothingness, who does not only stands in the critical zone of the line, but is himself, says Heidegger, the zone of thus the line. It's not transgressing the line, we are the line, whose only overcoming would be to abandon the language of metaphysics in figures, not in understanding, but figurating the burst of drives until наслаждение, jouissance, and destruction, in provocation of thought. I refer to my Dostoevsky Facing the Dead in order to discuss these two authors, Ernst Junger and Heidegger. Today, I'll not do this. I'll come back to my psychoanalytic perspective in which I'll stick today. I try to understand the universal nihilism that Dostoevsky diagnoses brilliantly before Freud and the Freudian. This Dostoevskian comprehension of our splitting and the proximity between nihilism and understanding resonates with a cluster of psychoanalytical concepts: splitting, rejection, denial, foreclosure, but also the work of negative hallucination, double reversal, etc., which I'll not discuss here in order not to address only those who are involved in psychoanalysis, but to make my approach to Dostoevsky more available to those that will read with me Dostoevskian heroes. When Freud himself approaches Dostoevsky, whom he does not really like, as he writes in a letter to Rank, "My patience with pathological natures is running out," says he. Freud is in the process of modifying his conception of psychic apparatus. Repression, Oedipus, and neurosis are not enough. Thanatos emerges, splitting, Eros, were in the Beyond of Pleasure Principles from 1920. Nevertheless, the Freudian confrontation with Dostoevsky, whom the founder of psychoanalysis divided in 4, he speaks about Dostoevsky as a writer, as a neurotic, as a moralist, and as a sinner. All these 4 branches, aspects of Dostoevsky is placed, nevertheless, in the Oedipus complex. And he criticizes Dostoevsky, and in the same time, he places him not far from Shakespeare. But all this is in the grids of Oedipal complex. My reading, on the contrary, proposes to probe the Dostoevskian polyphony with regard of the Freudian second topicality, the heterogeneity between drive and sense, the limit states, the breakdown, according to Winnicott, and transformation according beyond. My idea will be that modern psychoanalysis, this of Winnicott and beyond, will be closer to Dostoevskian comprehension of human being. From the very beginning of psychic life, because according to the second Freud, the psychic life is such that the drives of immediate satisfaction and pleasure are differed, retained, engrammed in mnemonic traces, which in their turn are granted to the internal and external perceptions to compose, recompose, redo and undo. It is the 0 degree of thought, the representation of the drives. Matter, which is neurons, brains, nervous system, renounces immediate pleasure and builds beyond it a substitute. It is our capacity to engram, to represent, to memorize, to think, to speak, to play, to write. We construct, we speaking being, a neo-reality that arrives at the price of a break, a leap, a generating cut. Freud calls it a psychic revolution of matter. And you can find this in a very interesting small piece of Freud from 1911 called A Formulation of the Two Principles of Mental Functioning. This psychic preformation initiates the original repression that makes possible the human capacity to speak and to think. The assumption of the libidinal components dispenses a specific new pleasure, which accompanies the creation of the symbol of negation and all symbols which will follow. Being appears under the form of non-being as thoughts, and a new pleasure, the pleasure of thoughts, but not only the organic pleasure of organic zones. The repressed is taken up in a sort of independence from repression, a suspension inscription in the flesh of drives and as well as in the flesh of words. This is sublimation. Lacan avoids this psychosexual economy by pivoting around what he calls the purely topological origin of language, and which is not satisfaction, it doesn't give satisfaction for me. He says this, is the speaking being speaking because of something that has happened to sexuality, or has something happened to sexuality because it is the speaking being? I prefer to return to Melanie Klein and her conception of the depressive position as a necessary condition for access to ideas and language. Or Marcel Proust, for whom the ideas are the successors of sorrows. He already knew something from Freud, we can suppose, when he says that ideas are successors of sorrows, as Melanie Klein will say. My work on objection, a crossroad of phobia, obsession, and perversion, elucidates this economy by which revolt is completely within the being of language. The separation with the object is a process of rejecting the object as awful, terrorizing, phobic, negative, and at the same time something that I have the obligation to utilize in order to name it and to make new pleasure from the process of naming itself. We call this place where neurons crumble and where Dostoevskian demons pour, splitting, a cut of refraction of the subject. Freud's disciples have pressed their clinic into this region. Death of self, death of the other, and resurrection of both. surrection. The word is from James Joyce, Away, Surrection, Finnegan's Wake. Dostoevsky anticipated, attributing the rage of this reversal to the narrator who polemicized with Chernyshevsky clandestine Lopukov, confronting and integrating at the bottom of the underground the wicked man, the sick man, the repulsive man, the paradoxical man, and turning up more alive. It's from the Notes from the Underground, which is maybe the most important and to begin with it as an introduction to Dostoevsky's other novel, we have to read the Notes from the Underground, where the man is disgusted from himself, from the others, and because of the expression of this destruction, this negativity, that he's able to follow the capacity to resurrect. I hear in this text also Dostoevsky, the epileptic, the man condemned to death, the convict on the verge of madness and unbeing, who live at the ultimate limit and spend his life crossing it, as he says in a letter to his friend, the poet Maikov. His breathless sentence, his jerky narrative that proceeds by leaps and paradox, renounces immediate pleasure and builds beyond it a substitutive neo-reality that comes at the price of break, a generating cut. Long before Freud and psychoanalysts, Dostoevsky realized that the epileptic explosion and its pains, fear and anxiety put him in contact with an essential dimension of the human condition, which is the coming into being and the eclipse of the sense, the senses and the sense, the destruction of himself, as in the coma of the epilepsy, and the capacity to meet again, be capable of senses and sense. These streams, these streaming words of Dostoevsky character reveal the minor splitting, to use the Melanie Klein terms, generating cascading mini narratives which destabilize the narrative thread and make Dostoevsky's universe a unfinished multiverse, created as a form of sarcasm, he specifies. The narrator's laughter crackles inside the wound, within the ruthless suffering from the split that separates and reunites perception and perceive, same and other, flesh and word, life and death. My immersion in Dostoevsky's writing can be read as a continuation of my reflection on the new maladies of the soul, which warned of the destruction or even disappearance of the psychic space bequeathed to us by the Greek, Jewish, and Christian tradition with the Muslim graft, and which psychoanalysis is probing and refining today against the current of anthropological acceleration. One could say that the author of Demons was the Russian Sade, in the sense of Marquis de Sade, in sadism. Certainly, but playing and upplaying passions, homoeroticism, feminicide, and even pedophilia. And I'll speak the next lecture about this. And by inspiring us to begin, continue, and innovate our own approval of light into death. A kind of self-analysis through reading, according to Rowan Williams, a leading Dostoevsky scholar, former Archbishop of Canterbury and professor, constitutive hiatus in the narrative. And I'm quoting from Rowan Williams that I'll recommend you to to read this his introduction to my last book in Columbia Press about Dostoevsky, a short book. But he's saying this, but the act of telling itself posits the area of obscurity, a hiatus between pure stimulus and its transnarration, in the sense that the act of telling opens up diverse possibilities, the unspoken potential for something to be said otherwise. Division and duality are inscribed in speech. Whenever something is said, we acknowledge its connection with what is said elsewhere and otherwise, because if we didn't, that would not be communication at all. And further on, another abstract from the interpretation of Rowan Williams of my reading of Dostoevsky. Why continue to read Dostoevsky? If Kristeva is right, the answer is so that we may learn what not many compatriots, so what we may learn, what not many contemporaries can teach us, and what a systematic secularism cannot teach us. Something about how desire becomes human, about how speech and storytelling work to humanize our desire and our fears of murderous absorption and our own murderous resort to abjection in enacting our desire and our terror, about need for a symbolic that makes space for the recognition of love. Dostoevsky's Christic fiction holds open that space, and we neglect it in our mortal peril as a culture, even as a species. If you follow this reflection, which summarizes my interest about the split and in the same time proximity to the destruction, the horror, and the morbid objection, we may be able to listen in another way, more personal, more macroscopic, and maybe deeper about what happens today. For instance, the war in Ukraine, that confirms in my mind what I wrote about Dostoevsky. Embarrassed by Russia, this is my quotation, a quotation of my last book. Embarrassed by Russia, troubled by nihilism, Europe has a hard time with its orthodox part. The quote. The second part of my book recalls the particularity of the Orthodox faith, in which Dostoevsky finds shelter while adapting it to his psychosexuality. Two types of Oedipus structure, Christian morality. The Orthodox per filium suggests by the preposition per, who means by, a delightful but pernicious annulment of the Son and the believer by the all-power authority of the Father, Pantocrator, whereas the Catholic filioque by the preposition que, and puts the Father and the Son, and thus the believer, on an equal footing, privileging the autonomy and independence of the person and paving the way of Western individualism and personality. The Holy Spirit comes from the Father per filium, by the Son, and from the Father and the Son, equality and not submission. The subjectivity is per filium could be interpreted as belonging to an unfinished Oedipus, but who can boast of a resolved Oedipus that keeps the son in a fusion diet rather than fostering the Oedipal triangulation, which means rebellion and overcoming that any psychic subject is supposed to access. This orthodox structuring disinhibits the expression of an older psychic layer, masochism and primitive anxieties, exalting depressive narcissism, lamentation, and death. Since the inexpressible and incommensurable divine authority admits neither discussion, nor criticism, nor negation, it only remains for anguish to express itself by destruction. The Orthodox faith invites the believer to surrender to sensory osmosis with absolute otherness, to the point of annihilation. Although if the touching bounds of the Orthodox community are so strong and prevail over kenosis, which is the annulment of the divine on the Good Friday, the free singularity remains always in suffering in the religious mapping of the psychology and the religion. And in this structure, the materialistic revolution that succeeded the religious construction of the singularity, the materialistic resolution that succeeds the religious mapping of the psyche that accompanies it today, is done in the Orthodox countries in the pagan way, aspiring only to the deep over into the market economy, whereas the emancipation moving stemming from Christian humanism aimed at the resurrection of the unique to the infinite diversity of the rebellious critics. This does not preclude the aspiration to universal communion supposed to be necessarily Russians from awakening Orthodox nostalgia among the oligarchs themselves. For orthodoxy, structurality lends itself to political instrumentation. For a Christian, there is no church without an emperor, declared Patriarch Antony in the 14th century. Dostoevsky's self-analysis accumulated this hallucinatory theological theorization to which his characters give themselves up, their contradictions, their clashes, and their judgments, multiplying the meaning and the resonance of faith up to the absurd and laughter, which is not erasing the faith, but conjugate gravity with unnameable. By privileging the sensuous and the antinomic thinking, orthodoxy in the manner of Dostoevsky seems to carry the memory of the gnosis. The gnostic model is not that of creation of identity and incarnation. It posits the anteriority of the pleroma, which is abundance, a prior antecedence, pre-cosmic and pre-father, an antecedent beginning that sets itself in motion by the play of contrary forces which animate it and generating a sort of emanation, which is a plurality of the world, but also a plurality of identities. I'll shorten this development here by saying that instead of the plurality that we inherited from metaphysics, Dostoevsky, instead of the duality that we inherited from the metaphysics of ontotheology, Dostoevsky based his fictional thinking on plurality, on the abundance of the multiplicity of voices, which even when he uses faith and orthodoxy, he uses it in the carnivalesque way, and a carnival, in the sarcasm, in laugh, in pluralizing the sense, of multiplying meanings and confronting us to the absurd and to the unnameable. So in this pluralistic notion of meaning seems to me closer not to our ontotheology and metaphysics, but more to the Jewish Kabbalah's Tzimtzum, which is infinite stimulation movement of contraction and expansion. The novels and the characters of Dostoevsky expound and restrict themselves, and we cannot grasp them in the finite figures and definitive messages. They are plural, they are incomprehensible, they are Russians, they are human, they are more than nihilistic, they are complex, as is human being. So we can, in this sense, answer, are the Karamazov brothers Oedipal parasites, or are they Kabbalistic Gnostics? I would prefer to say they are polyphonic, and they leave every question open. Now, let's me in 10 minutes and give you 15 minutes for questions. Let me try to clarify or to make more concrete this problematic, to give an example of my reading of one novel, which is The Gambler from 1866, where the narrator is the gambler himself. The narrator is called Alexei Ivanovich. He's the young tutor of a general's children. He falls in love with the beautiful daughter of this old man, Polina Alexandrovna, who is going to play him. In the novel, Alexis becomes addicted to gambling as he gets caught up in the game and experiences, I'm quoting, the enjoyment like no other, except that of a whip when it stems into our backs and tears our flesh, at the quote. It's very sadistic jouissance, that of the whip when it slams into the backs of and tears our flesh. This stinging image betrays not a teacher, not a tutor, but a convict. It is not Alexis, the tutor of the naive general's children. It is Dostoevsky, the convict, who feels the whims of chance and who shudders when he hears the voice of the chief dealer declare the last 3 spins, gentlemen. He was a gambler himself. In Notes from the House of Death, Dostoevsky describes the convict who are thirsty for alcohol and whipped, and who manage to get money to gamble and lose while laughing. And the novelist tells us that in this debauchery, there is the laughter of freedom, end of quote. Quoted only a dream of freedom. Spending his money, the convict acts as a free man. The psychopathological problem of gambling becomes here metaphysical. It's not only spending, freedom is also a metaphysical problem. And in this way, Dostoevsky and his sadism, Dostoevsky as Sadian, becomes a Pascalian. Why? because suffering and freedom are the same and reverse parts of our psyche. To bet is to make a wager, to win, to be free, to get out of it. To bet is a way of believing. Can we dare not to believe? Not sure. You are free to bet on the void. That is what Alexis will do. After losing everything, but one last coin, he didn't dare not to believe, and he bet on the zero, on the void, on the lack, on nothing. And he won. How not to bet on the lack when one has not that, one has only that to dare. And it is already huge. It makes you live because you can have a project, although we don't know what is this project, but you only open it. Readers dare to bet, dare to believe, says in substance the gambler. It is, in my mind, by depicting this gambler, a picture of the modern humanity that Dostoevsky gives us to us, that is being born around Dostoevsky and through his writing. It is already a prisoner humanity, a concentration camp. All convicts imprisoned, held by socioeconomic and administrative constraints, confined, we would say today, by liberticidal procedures, convict, lined by their poor version of gamblers who need to believe even it is in the void. Money, debauchery, and freedom is one of Dostoevsky's obsessive themes, along with the trio of lovers, 2 men and 1 woman, 2 men and 1 man, 2 women and 1 man, and also the theme of the raped little girl, about which I'll speak next week. Money is everything, diagnoses the novelist, a keen observer of the situation in Russia, a country where rampant capitalism was sweeping away the old Russia at the end of the 19th century. But not only the gambler is Sadian and Pascalian, it is more complex because nothing is simple in Dostoevsky's work. Everything is money and everything is permitted, as a nihilistic says. This vision will lead the writer himself to the fantasy of the Jew, who by possessing money would possess all the powers, vices, and the manipulations. A sort of hate-loving of the Jews is widespread in Dostoevsky's work. On the one hand, his unabashedly populist political anti-Semitism, which is explicit in his text, The Jewish Opinion, his diary from 1877. And on the other hand, a continuous veneration of the biblical message against contradiction, senses and sense, destruction and jouissance, anti-Semitism and worship and veneration of biblical message. The Jew, brotherly neighborhood and threatening rival, but no less supreme authority, as attested to by what Dostoevsky called the wake-up call in the synagogue that will put an end to the jouissance under the lash of the whip at the casino. And let me finish with this anecdote that happened in Wiesbaden and that he calls the wake-up call in the synagogue. It happens in 1871 in Wiesbaden. The novelist, tormented and ashamed to have lost everything, willing to confess for the umpteenth time in an Orthodox church, finds himself unwillingly but pushed by the fate, as he says, in a synagogue. He wanted to say to go to a Christian Orthodox church, but it was a synagogue. And he writes this to his wife. It was a wake-up call for me. A great work was accomplished in me. A stupid, despicable fantasy that had been tormenting me for 10 years vanished. Now it's all over. I was bound by the game. Now I would think only of my work, not bound to the passion of destruction of myself, of losing and of annihilating myself. Now I will think only of my work. My work will be done better and faster, and God will bless me. End of quote. Would he have heard the last job that he had known by heart still since his childhood? Because he says that he had learned about job since his childhood. His mother had told him about job. This job that young Elihu reconciles with Yahweh, neither guilty nor innocent, repudiating transgression and mortification. Yahweh gave him a sign. Dostoevsky is never reconciled, but as Job will be, through transgressions and mortification, he finally is unified with his God, which doesn't come to Dostoevsky. He always said until the end of his life that he's believer and non-believer in the same time. He's a child of the Enlightenment, but at the same time a very enthusiastic Russian Orthodox. But he's never reconciled, every time split. But the moment of the wake-up call, the unnameable recognized him, perhaps neglect him almost. Dostoevsky will not longer go to the casino. The work alone, without destruction, now takes over from the roulette wheel. Writer now will write. He knows that writing is a game of chance, of light and death. Every writer today, in a sense, knows this, and Philippe Solers makes this clear by calling one of his novels Portrait d'un joueur, portrait of a gambler. The novel The Gambler was dictated to the young stenographer Anna Grigorievna Snitkina, 25 years his junior, who would become his wife. Without the gambler stopping to exhaust himself during 5 years from 1866 to 1871, in this wake-up encounter with the Jewish God in the synagogue, he stopped exhausting himself at roulette and dissipated the door of his wife. The great novels will follow: The Demons from 71, The Adolescent, The Brother Karamazov. And we will talk again about Dostoevsky and women, because it is to his woman that he narrates what happens in the synagogue, and he continued to write in another way, not the neurotic, but the post-neurotic carnival writing, polyphonic writer. Thank you, and we have some 20 minutes for questions. Maybe Miglena can address the audience and organize our discussion if if you are some questions to begin, or some.
I have many
Or the
questions,
humanity.
but I think it would be nice if some other people ask their question. Usually you just join, jump in if you have something to ask.
I see Madame Kolosova that I mentioned in my introductory remarks on the
Yes,
screen.
she's here.
Maybe she's
Yeah.
more energetic.
I'm
in her
here.
questions.
I'm here as the translator. Should French be required for the questions? I would like to leave the floor to the students who have been following the course. So lay low if possible. If not,
Okay,
we
so,
can.
so
we
let,
can
let me,
Mhm.
is somebody else trying to ask something? Because I'm not sure.
Milena Zak should be following the reactions area if somebody is raising hands.
Well, I can ask in between
Okay.
while people so gather their courage to ask. And it is about orthodoxy and this idea of rebellious citizens on the one hand, and whatever's the problem with orthodoxy, if there is one, because I think there are many orthodoxies after all. But I remember as an anecdote, I haven't checked it, I don't know how true it is, but there is this Russian, I think they used to be called revolutionary Democrats, a pro-Western, liberal-minded writer, Herzen, who at some point finally, after a lot of trouble, succeeded in getting to the West. And then among the many things he wrote from there, because he wrote also contradictory things, I guess, but there is this amazing sentence in which he says, you know, in Russia we have a policeman standing next to each person, but here in the West there is a policeman standing inside each person. So can this be connected also to this division between Eastern Orthodoxy and whatever, the Western humanism?
Well, I gave these examples of Orthodoxy and Western Christianity in a very schematic way, because in order to explain that both of these tendencies in Western ontotheology are familiar and correspond to the psyche of every person, be it Western and Eastern. But in the history which have to take into account the geographical and political development of Eastern and Western Europe, in this complex historical movement from 200 and more, how to say, to the Milan now, the churches were emphasized differently as something which is universal. And the Freudian conception of humanity explains that all of us are Orthodox, and all of us can be also Protestants or or Catholic. Per filium and filioque are religious schemas that tried in different historical moments to rule humanity and to impose them a particular conception of their inner life. that churches govern and exploit. And the great cut that happened in the history of our civilization and the humanities, for me, the Enlightenment, where we cut with this religious comprehension of the inner experience. And the Enlightenment is, for me, something which is in question now. It depends on us, thinkers, writers, people that are interested in history, but also in creativity of human beings, to understand this moment that which is the cutting with the tradition. The cutting means that we begin a new understanding of our psyche, but this new understanding supposes the reevaluation of the religious experience. And studying and teaching literature is also an invitation to reevaluate not only the different rhetorical devices, style, grammar, and whatever represents literature or different pictorial or musical aesthetic performances, but to reinterpret the religious background which is behind it, in order to widen our comprehension of the human experience without discriminating. The one is good and the other is bad. The one is only regressive and the other is only opening for new humanism or whatever. Everything, as Dostoevsky understood it, is something that belongs to the Russian as well as to Europeans. And he loved and hated both of them on different moments of his personage and his polyphonic writing. And that's why he is interesting for us, because he's not privileging Europe, he's not privileging only orthodoxy, maybe, and from time to time he gives the impression to be an enthusiastic pro-Orthodox Church believer, or pro-European revolutionary thinker, but no one and the other. He's always questioning, dissolving, and putting open to us and inviting us to interpret what he's saying from our own pains and how to say, commas, losing sense, losing meaning, capacity to be annihilated, until considering that the epileptic experience could be also ours, and try to identify with these limit states of mind, be it feminicide, pedophilia, or epilepsy. So this invitation to be every kind of human experience and try to find the words to correspond to this trembling of the identities is something that interrogates us. It's not an answer, but is how to say, an invitation not to belong to the already prepared answers, to partisan attitude.
Okay, thank you. So, is there another question?
It seems like Anna wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this lecture. It was perfect. And I have a question about contradictions that you mentioned. That contradictions are important for Dostoevsky, and I was thinking about another author for whom these affirmed contradictions are important. It's Nietzsche, and I've thought about Shestov's work on Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, and how they are similar. And I was wondering if you do you agree with Shestov on this matter? Do you find that there are some similarities? I mean, like Shestov, he's almost trying to approach them all also because of their psychological type and their lives, etc. But I'm interested more like in the style of writing also, because the style of writing, as you call it, transgenre writing, it's also similar to some extent, because Nietzsche, at least in Zarathustra, he's also trying to make like essay and a poem at the same time, so philosophical and artistic approach. He's trying to mix them, and so yeah, do you agree with Shestov with like on this point of approaching these two authors or philosophers?
Thank you very much for this question. It opens the podium, eventually the other questions in my mind in two directions. The first one is the different interpreters, philosophers, or writers that wrote on Dostoevsky, and Shestov is one of them that inspired my work, and I tried to be how to say, pregnant by his thinking without academically referring often to what I found in him, and particularly the parallel with Nietzsche. One chapter of my book is about Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, and how the last scene that we know about Nietzsche's madness with the horse is something that could be one of a scene of one of the personages of Dostoevsky, the crime and I don't know how is
Crime and Punishment.
Punishment. So this is the one aspect. I was also influenced in a sense, and it was very fruitful for me, by Berdyaev's work on Dostoevsky. And when just small remark that he did about the proximity between Dostoevsky and the Gnosis. And he just said this and invited me to spend one holiday in my house in the Rhea Island to read the Gnostic tradition and to see how Dostoevsky maybe didn't read it, but it is inspired by the Gnostic background of orthodoxy, which is the abundance, not the antithesis, but the duality, not A versus B, but A and B. And this constitutive duality makes that every identity could be necessarily polyphonic, because the contradiction engenders movement. And if you recognize that you're man and woman, this duality makes you transgender or neutral or whatever. But it crosses some modern interrogations of the notion of identity, antithesis, and gender. Well, this is just one aspect. So Nietzsche, duality and not antithesis, and plurality, and the style, which is something that Bakhtin, of course, underlined and stressed about the importance of laughter, of nonsense, of mask, the plurality of interpretations. And I go even further, referring to another interpreter of Dostoevsky. This is Proust. This is something not very well known. One of the last writings of Proust on the eve of his death, he speaks about Dostoevsky And he speaks about the women in Dostoevsky, the notion of vengeance and cruelty. And finally, he says that it is not the most important that he retains from Dostoevsky, but the music. Because the music of Dostoevsky, the style, this plurality, this back and down of death and revival, evokes him the last pieces of Beethoven. Dostoevsky is Beethoven, which means that we are beyond the plurality of identities in language. This is a plurality of pre-entrance language, something that he hears in the polyphony of Dostoevsky. And I think it's very interesting for people that will try after Proust and me to make some stylistic research on the narrative in Dostoevsky or the sentence in Dostoevsky to try to restore this musicality of Dostoevsky's Russian, which is very accessible to people that speak his native language. Because when I read the first time in French Dostoevsky, I get the impression that it's something very theoretical, very pedagogical, very heavy. And I didn't have this impression when I read it when I was young in Russian. And then I came back to the Russian and to the French new translation by Markievicz, who is more oral and more free in the construction of the sentence, and gives this vocality, this musicality that Proust listening captured in Dostoevsky, although for the French translators it's difficult to make French language to not be Cartesian, but more ludic and playful. But this is something that is behind the rhetorics, very musical. And I don't know how is English on the translation. I cannot appreciate with my poor English, but to read Dostoevsky in Russian is the experience that is worthy to be done by those who will be interested by him in English first, and then to try to go further. There is another question by Madame Kolozova, I think.
Well, I was waiting, checking to see if the students are interested in asking a question. If not, I will ask one.
Maybe there are other questions from students.
The students are intimidated by the great Kristeva, so nobody is asking questions.
I think that when they hear my English, they will not be very intimidated.
It's perfect. I thought that I would have to struggle with my French to help, but okay, I'm saved because you're super fluent in the language, obviously. I wanted to ask you a question myself, but wanted to give the chance first to the students. So I guess the tension between Freud and Dostoevsky is understandable from Freud's point of view, because the notion of subject and subjectivity, and the whole psychic universe and the entire instrumentarium of concepts that he operates with somehow stabilize the, let's say, Kantian understanding concept of the subject that prevailed since enlightenment onwards. Respect. So this is what horrified Nietzsche, right? in spite of his cynicism toward Christianity, he was also horrified by what opens up as a gap that cannot ever be filled up with any form of subjectivity. This jarring absence of content at the heart of the human subject after the death of religion, or the status that religion had until Enlightenment. So Nietzsche testified to this, kind of declared and elaborated the horror of it. Maybe that's why they kind of resonate with one another with Dostoevsky. But on the other hand, we have Freud, who seems to be actually at ease and at peace with this situation, and in a way sets up the dog is barking, and in a way sets up the norm and the framework of normalization of this new form of exacting one's humanness, being human. So this new format of human subjectivity, the individualistic, rational, enlightened, human, existential, realist subject. Let's put it that way. I'm using a bit of a Dostoevsky parallels here. Isidora, can you just shut the dog? Sorry. Sorry, the dog is barking. So it seems like I hope the dog did not cover my question. So if let's say Freud standardizes this modern concept, let's put it that way, modern concept of subject and subjectivity, and it instills it as the only psychic universe we might have, and one has ever had, is it at any odds, and is it in any way possible different from whatever Dostoevsky might have imagined as the core of human subjectivity, and what constitutes it?
I think we have to organize a new colloquium with you and me as key speakers, and we'll try to deepen this interrogation of Freudian subjectivity. Let me just two directions. Freud, that and until the end of his life, and the introduction of the death drive until the last books are very different from the Oedipal and repressed organized subjectivity. It's an open one, unfinished, and very challenging against any Kantian and peaceful or whatever identity interested in the social pact building subjectivity. There is a sort of possibilities of developing the psychoanalysis that happened with Lacan in a sense, but can be again enclosed in the sort of conceptualization through models, and which is developed in my mind in the direction that I follow by Winnicott and particularly Bion, with the notion of transformation. But as far as we cling to the concepts in the theory, we betray the possibility of permanently rebuilt subjectivity that Freud gave to us. When he says that the analytical transference is an infinite process, he opens the way of not limiting the comprehension of the human psyche to concepts, to understanding, and to any kind of inheritance of the Enlightenment Kantianism, but to try to speak about the humanity in figures, which is, in the Heideggerian sense, to turn the notions into rhetorical figures. This is something very subtle, because we don't have any other way to express our fails or creativity as humans than language. And language is structured in a dual way. The phonemes, the syntax are autotheological. But we have the possibilities through this language to rebuild the language in figures, which is the possibility to turn over the free association and make language recreate itself. Music, style, literature, picture, and so on. And psychoanalysis is in the border of this comprehension and transformation of the comprehension through other kinds of expressions. Our limits are obvious, and in the same time, we cannot have another issue against the different betrayal of the creativity and transformation, and then to continue to understand, but also to accompany our understanding with inflection in it of our own personal experience through free association, writing, fiction, and transgenre. This is something that challenges the place of the university, because we have to transmit the tradition, but to also to follow different experiences, not knowledges, but experiences that try to share. They are going to the limits of the meaning by pictorial, like semiotic, I call this, experiences that are translinguistics, pre and post-linguistics. And in the situation as this we have now, which is a struggle of ideologies, at the same time as it's a struggle of military ones, we have to belong to such and such ideology that we consider more or less necessary to ensure the life of humanity, but in the same time to open the screen of ideological competitions and the philosophical battle to the intimate experiences that happen in the couch or in the creative writing. So the place of the university is to be defended, but in the same time, explicit and how to say, analyzed itself in its limits and potentials.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, this is one of the, let's say, main ideas maybe behind this inter-university platform that SMR is. It is a platform of 4 universities and the one para-university, let's say, organization now, a fifth one. So it's us, I mean, the institution I represent, the institute from Skopje, and there is Arizona State University, who is basically sponsoring your course, and there is the Eindhoven Academy of Design and the Vienna Technical University as the key founding institutions that are universities themselves, but also try to create this space on the margins that allows for this playfulness that you were talking about, if we can call it that way. Okay, Chelsea had a question, I think.
Yeah. So I recently read In Search of Lost Time, and
Where are you, Chelsea? I can't see you.
oh, sorry, I forgot to turn on my camera. Hi. I recently read In Search of Lost Time, although I haven't started your book on it yet. And in my read, I found that sexual difference is a major theme. You think of Virginia Woolf, who says that characters wear their sex on their sleeve, I believe, or they wear it without shame. My apologies. And it's very, very evident, especially in the beginning of Sodom and Gomorrah, where there is the vanilla orchid, and there's that bee that flies between them, functioning. It's almost an engine of sexuality, but it also represents alterity. So I was wondering, in what way is alterity and sexual difference represented in Dostoevsky? Thank you.
Well, this is a question I'll try to reach in the next lecture about how he considered the feminine in himself, the feminine in the child, and how he accused himself of pedophilia, etc., etc. So it's a big question. Thank you to go so far, but I cannot schematize this now. I'll invite you to come to the next lecture and to continue to follow this question with different examples in Dostoevsky's work and the images that he left to his contemporaries and that were discussed after his death until now.
Thank you. I will absolutely be there.
Well, if
there is another question, maybe let us be how to say, free and courageous, and to go further if there are. I wonder if the students that are here come from the Russian department or Dostoevsky department, or not the Dostoevsky department, but I mean comparative literature. How many people have read besides Anna Strechuk? Have read Dostoevsky or some pieces from Dostoevsky? What means Dostoevsky for them? Or maybe they are interested more than in me or in Madame Kolosova or other professors than in Dostoevsky himself. But maybe speaking about somebody who is apparently very far from us, but whose experience resonates with the crisis like ours today, maybe will encourage some of you to go and to read Dostoevsky himself. And we'll speak about him next time, after you have read some of his pieces.
I'm suspecting that most of the students are here because of you, but maybe some also because of Dostoevsky. I also wonder how many of the present read Dostoevsky. I know I did.
Maybe there are no anymore. They're not French departments, but they are Russian departments, maybe, or not.
They're mostly philosophy, I think, the students here, yeah. Or yeah, political philosophy, theory. Most of the in
But as you
Rome.
know, maybe French philosophy, existentialism, was very much influenced by Dostoevsky after the war. For instance, Sartre and Camus particularly, and some others not so known, converted to Orthodox Christianity because of this opening of the Orthodox Christianity to the experience of melancholia, depression, emotion, unbridled emotivity or something, in order to free themselves from this gendarme who is the superego of the Westerns. Some people understand this, and to be more human in the sense of sharing senses and not meaning, so something more archaic. But now I think it's even in people in the university like French, some the departments for Russian connected to Dostoevsky, etc., become more and more threatened by financial restrictions and so on. Nevertheless, there are some brilliant scholars, and one of those people who is elected now to the Sorbonne helped me very much to follow what Russian critics develop nowadays about Dostoevsky. There is, besides Rowan Williams that I quoted, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who made the preface to my book in Columbia Press, there is a very interesting development of Russian theory of literature devoted to Dostoevsky, his religious conceptions, interpretation from the point of view of Jung, for instance, not very much Freudians, but he's a writer that nourish the Russian theory today. And some French researchers, like this doctorand that I have as help for following Dostoevsky in Russia now, are people with a very deep philosophical background and interesting creative philosophical thinking.
Okay, so we have a question. Eduarda has a question.
It's just a short commentary on actually a visual arts student, a Brazilian visual arts student, but and also a student in at the New Center. And there I've been for the past year interested in some ways of humanism and of building a sort of Marxism that goes through the real abstraction and so on. Hato, working with Jean-Pierre Caron, who's also a teacher there, which I know is Katarina is acquainted with. And also on my master's and through my doctorate, I'm intending on developing some things on how trans experience relates to abjection, which is why I made the question to Miglena in the last class about the intersection of the cultural aspect of abjection and the physical sensation of abjection, because I think that most trans people, from what I share with them and from what they tell me, and yes, sorry, Katerina, I forgot to say, because I'm fairly new to the New Center. And sharing this experience about how it is to be trans and what is to be trans in Brazil, which is the place that kills it's the place where trans women mostly are killed in brutal ways. We are the country that it's the first on the world rank. I feel that the idea of abjection, it really covers a lot of what is our experience, even with women in general, even with men and with everyone else.
Thank you. We open a very interesting question leading to, if I understood you well, to the position that we have also both of us in connection with Marxism, how to join Marxism with objection, if I can shorten your question. I think they are complementary, but you cannot find in Marxism this profusion of interconnection, death and love, construction and deconstruction that is connected with the intimate experience of the individual. In the Marxist conception, which is important to rebuild in the nowadays globalization and technology, we consider the individual as an unity, and we don't go into the different aspects, complications, failures, experiences, life and death within the ego, the individual. And here comes the Freudian conception of the individual and this notion of subjectivity that we modern psychoanalysts try to refine, to deepen, and to maintain as a possible expression, not only on the couch, but in some social realizations, some languages that are shareable. How objection can be shareable, not only by being a new ideology and a new identity, which is also necessary in order to be recognized, but also to make this experience fruitful, possible to creativity that brings to the complexity of the social background different experiences that other people don't know, but they can share and enrich their own experience. So this is the crossword between Marxism and objection is a problematic of creativity and how to share my borderline experience. This is something that is dear to psychoanalysts, but literature and fiction and art join us in this ambition to make shareable the borderline experiences.
Eduarda, was this sufficient, the answer, or do you?
Yes, no, certainly. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So there is a question from Chelsea, whether it is possible to have a follow-up question, although it's getting pretty late, I guess. Kate, you are the one who...
Well, I think Professor Kristeva decides if she has the energy for one more follow-up question.
Yes, of course,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Hi, so I'm sorry to ask a second question, but I've recently been thinking about this, and I would like to thank my fellow classmate for bringing up objection against trans women. I've been thinking a lot about objection and what you described at where we bring our experiences together, which sounds a lot like the old practice of consciousness raising.
Karim, je suis encore à la télévision. Je suis encore là, vous m'entendez 10 minutes. Yes, excuse me.
Which sounds to, oh, sorry.
Yes.
Oh, it sounds kind of similar to consciousness raising about different issues related to, say, for in this example, trans people. One worry that I have, though, is that we would just be, as Gail Rubin describes it in Thinking Sex, just moving the fence. Just moving the fence as to what is on this side of the border rather than that side of the border, and not really attacking an underlying issue. Do you have any thoughts on this? Am I overcomplicating things, or is just moving the border really an issue that we should be thinking about?
Miglena, vous pouvez me traduire parce que je n'ai pas très bien compris la question. Ou Madame,
moi, je ne suis pas certaine si j'ai bien compris aussi. Je vais
can you simplify your question? Yes,
je vais demander maintenant
Yeah, sorry.
de simplifier. Because I failed to understand it in English as well. You see an issue in merely moving the borders as something that comes down to awareness raising, but not going to the core of the question of trans subjectivity, something like that.
So it's about objection. You mostly got it, actually. Is there a way to sort of attack the objection of people in a wider way, rather than simply saying, well, this group of person is okay, and that group of person is okay, but those other groups are not? Is there a way to sort of bring out a wider change, or is it always going to be slightly moving who falls on what side of the object?
Well, I'm maybe not able to answer your question because you have your own experience. You try to transmit us something very, very, how to say, keen and close to your own life and meetings and creations. I was very realistic when I spoke about objection. It was a concrete experience related to my observation of the early mother-child relations and how the child, before separating with the mother, is in a position of vomiting her in disgust, rejection, outbursting. And this is essential for the autonomization of the ego that will, next step, give us a verb, not a verbalization, but a sound to the object that was rejected. And it's to say that the basis of language is not a separation as a sort of abstract meaning, but a behavior of revulsion, repulsion, which is at the same time oral, anal, urethral, tactile, and from this basis, negative, but not negative abstractly, but in a very flesh way. And we have to understand, or not to understand, but to capture every verbal expression as underlined by this emotional and even biological movement of belonging and leaving and losing. Now, when I understood that, I tried to find the occurrences of this bi-faced movement in the children play, in the painting, in the free association of my patients, and to give to them not an explanation, but my own rejection, and to involve the patient in an attitude of objection with me as an analyst, and to try to elaborate this movement that has been elaborated in one way in the childhood and can be elaborated differently now, and can give way of different other versions of this elaboration of the objection in the life and the creation of languages of my patients. So to see this movement of objection as underlying every kind of rebuilding of the personality and give it the capacity to create new languages. So my position is limited to this experience, but saying this, I see how it's not very much limited, but it's open to give to the psychoanalytic experience the horizon of creating new languages by assuming the objection in any kind of human relationship. I'm not sure to answer your question, but I tell you how I use this notion and how it is very personal, related to the transfers in the couch, the psychoanalytic experience, but can be understood. For instance, when I see how people from the Ukrainian side or on the Russian side speak about the war today, I not identify with them, but I try to understand and to separate from them. I'm an attitude and reaction, objection, creation. And so it's not a partisan way, but it's a way of trying to take them out of the limits and to try to build new languages between us.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
So, Miglena, are we wrapping up for today? Or?
Julia, I think maybe it's time to
It's very much time. Yes, we will.
yeah. Okay, we'll have the chance
Continue
to
next week.
So continue next week, and in fact, some of the questions were already pointing towards the discussion next week. So thank you from my name and in the name of everybody else. It was fantastic. And see you everybody next week. And next week it will be on Tuesday. Let me
Tuesday.
remind you all. Maybe we should also circulate a letter about this, because it will be the only seminar which will take place on Tuesday rather than Monday.
I'll be sure to
Thank you
make
very
everybody
much, and thank you for
know.
your patience. Apologize for my English, and thank you for following.
Your English is fantastic.
Thanks to your help with the projection of the text on the screen.
Oh,
Thank you.
no. Ciao, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.